Ladies and gentlemen, g'day, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Economics Mate, and welcome back to another video here in World of Tanks Blitz. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about a very important topic: tech trees. I get a lot of questions being asked over the years, and just in recent times, especially. I'm just going to relocate and sit over here. I got asked a lot of questions recently, and one person in particular, who was a newer player into the game, was asking in the Blitz Discord server. I'm not going to name names, obviously, but they were genuinely curious about the Progetto 65 and whether or not you can actually research that tank. And considering that they play on APAC, they're wondering, because it's a European nation tank, can they actually research it? And my answer to that question is yes, you can. There is actually a European tech tree which has sub-tech trees within this tech tree, because Wargaming, in their great wisdom, thought it would be easier if they just had a European tech tree line and then have different nations branching out from that. It's just caused a bit of confusion for a lot of newer players. So I'm here to make it easier for you guys. For you newer players out there who want to know about tech trees and what tanks are probably best to grind up, I'm here to help. This video is for you guys that want to know about this tank. So let's start off with the European tech tree, because it's the most confusing out of all of them. So, to answer people's questions, yes, you can actually grind different nation tanks within this sort of big nation tech tree, right? So you start off with a Czech-Slovakian tank, I believe, and then you'll make your way through some Polish tanks, some Swedish tanks, and then you branch out to Italian tank destroyers, which are up here. So you got the Samovente, you got the Bossotto, you got the SMV CC56, you got the SMV CC64 at tier 8, the CC1 Mark II, and of course the Minotauro at tier 10, right? And then on the tech tree below that, continuing the Swedish line, you have the STRV 74, the Leo, the Emil 1, the Emil 2, and the Kranvagen, which is a tier 10, Swedish heavy tank. So you start off with your medium Swedish tanks, and then you work your way up to your tier 10 heavy tanks. And then you have the 40 TP, the 45 TP, the 53 TP, the 50 TP, and of course the 60 TP, which is a tier 10 Polish heavy tank. So you start off with the 40 TP, which is a tier 6 Polish heavy tank, and you work your way through those different heavy tanks to get to the 60 TP, which is a tier 10. So now you have the Italian tank destroyers, you have the Swedish heavy tanks, you have the Polish heavy tanks. And if you work your way down, you have the Skoda PJS, the VZ44-1, the TNH 105-1000, the TNH-T VZ51, and of course the VZ55, which is a Czech-Slovakian tier 10 heavy tank. And you can see that entire line is, of course, a heavy tank line. And then below that, you have the Skoda T25, the T34-100, the TVP VTU, the Skoda T50, and the TVP T50-51, which is a tier 10 Czech-Slovakian medium tank. So, or a Czech tank, I guess you could say. So very cool to see that there's different nations in this big tech tree, and this just goes to show that you can research all these different tanks if you want. And then below that, you have the P43 Bis, the Carro, you have the Progetto CC55, you have the Progetto C50, and you have the Rosso Norente, which is a tier 10 Italian heavy tank. So this is the Italian heavy tank line. And then below that, you have the P43 TR, you have the P44 Pantera, the Standard B, and the Progetto 65, which of course is a tier 10 medium tank. And this is the one that they were asking about, whether they can actually research the Progetto 65 as a tech tree tank on APAC. And the answer is yes, you can research all of these tanks on every single server, whether you're on NA, EU, or APAC. And then below that, you have a newer line for the CS63. So you have the DSPZ INS, the BUGI, which I call the buggy, the CS44, the CS53, the CS59, and of course the CS63, which is, I believe, the Czech-Slovakian medium tank. So there you go. This entire tech tree, the European nation tech trees, they're branched out into different nation tech trees. You've got Italian tank destroyers, heavy tanks, medium tanks. You have Swedish heavy tanks, and that's it. You have Polish heavy tanks, and that's it. And of course, you have Czechoslovakian medium tank. You have 2 medium tanks, and of course, you have the heavy tank, the VZ55. So, very, very nice indeed. Then you have France. Now with France, it's a much easier tech tree line to go up, but of course you do have different sort of tank types. You got your tank destroyers, which stop at the Foch 155. Then you have the AMX 50B, which is the heavy tank line. Then you have the Bachatillon 25T, which of course is the light tank line. And then the brand new tank line, which has just been released in the recent update, is of course the Project Marat, which is the T10 French medium tank line. So you have tank destroyer, heavy tank, light tank, and of course medium tank. Then you have the Chinese the China tech tree, or the Chinese tech tree line. And again, very, very easy to follow. You have a choice of where you want to go. Okay, you can go for the WZ111 GFT, which is the T10 Chinese tank destroyer, or the BZ75, which is one of the Chinese T10 heavy tanks. You have the WZ113, which is was basically the first Chinese T10 tank to be released in the game, which of course is the Chinese heavy tank. You have the WZ121, which was the second tech tree line to come in for the Chinese line, which is a medium tank with a 122mm. It's very, very nice. And then you have the WZ132-1, which of course is the T10 light tank line. So you have 2 heavy tanks to choose from, a medium, a tank destroyer, and a light tank. The Japanese line, very easy to go up as well. You have a choice of 3 tanks in this one. You have the Hori, which is the T10 tank destroyer. You have the STB-1, which is the T10 medium tank. And of course the Type 71, which is the T10 heavy tank. So very, very simple here. Whether you want to go tank destroyer, heavy tank, or medium tank, there is no Japanese light tanks just yet. But I presume it's going to be coming soon in the future. Don't know when, but we'll see. The British line. This is a bit more complicated because there's a lot more tanks in this one. You have a choice. You can go for 2 different tank destroyers. You can have the FV215B183, aka the Death Star, which has a massive 185mm gun. Or you can go for the FV4005, which has a 4-shot 120mm gun. Very, very nice indeed. They play sort of similar, but different playstyles entirely, and I'll get into that a bit. Then you have the FV4202, which is a T10 British medium tank. Then you have your Vickers light tank, which is of course a light tank. And then you have the FV215B, which is the T10 British heavy tank. So you have a choice of 1 heavy tank, 1 medium tank, 1 light tank, and 2 tank destroyers. Now we go to the Russian tank line, or the Soviet tank line. There is a lot more tanks in the Soviet tank line, as you can see. So we're going to start off with the Object 268. Now the Object 268 is the T10, is one of, I should probably say, the T10 Soviet tank destroyers. Then below that you have the Object 263, which is a different playstyle completely to the 268. You have the IS-7 line, which is one of the heavy tanks. You have the IS-4 line, which is another one of the Soviet heavy tanks. So you got 2 different heavy tanks, 2 different tank destroyers. Then you have 2 different medium tanks. Now the difference here is that the Object 140 is on its own. You can choose, when you finish from the T54 at Tier 9, you can choose whether you want to go for an Object 140 or the T62A. You have a choice there, or you can get both, like I did. And then you have the Tier 10 Soviet light tank, which is the T100LT. So you have a choice of 2 tank destroyers, 2 heavy tanks, 2 medium tanks, and 1 light tank. Then we go to the German tank line. Now, the German tech tree line is also pretty big as well, so stick around. You start off with the Grille 15 if you want a tank destroyer. It's one of the tank destroyers, the Grille 15. Or you can go a completely different tank destroyer and go for the Jagdpanzer E100, which is a Tier 10 super heavy tank destroyer. We'll get to that. Then you can go for one of 3 heavy tanks. The VK7201K, the Maus, and of course the E100. There are 3 different tanks, heavy tanks for the German line at T10. 3 different playstyles, but very similar in characteristics. And then you have 2 different medium tanks. You have the E50M line, which is like a heavy medium tank, and you have the Leopard 1, which is more of a lighter armored medium tank. And then we're getting, from the RU251, we're going to be getting, hopefully, the new German German light tank, which is the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. So we're finally going to have a light tank line coming very, very soon. So for the German tech tree, you have 2 tank destroyers you can choose from that play very differently from each other, 3 different heavy tanks, 2 medium tanks, and very, very soon in the next couple updates, we're going to be seeing the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, which of course is going to be the tier 10 German light tank. And finally, we come to the American tech tree line. This also has its fair share, so we're going to go through it. You have two different types of tank destroyers that you can choose from. You have the T110E4, which is a turreted tank destroyer at T10, or you can go for the T110E3, which is a non-turreted, super heavy tank destroyer at T10 for the American line. You have the T110E5, which is one of the first heavy tanks you can choose for the American line, or you can go the second heavy line, which is the M6Yo, or you can go for the T57 Heavy, which is another heavy tank. So you have a choice of 3 different heavy tanks to choose from. And then we have the M48 Patton, which is a T10 medium tank for the American line. And then, of course, you have the Tier 10 light tank, which is the Sheridan. So you have 2 tank destroyers you can choose from. You have 3 different heavy tanks that you can choose from that play very different from each other. And you have a light tank and you have a medium tank. Now, talking about different tank lines in terms of what I would recommend for every single nation if you're just starting out. So let's start out with the American tech tree line. If you want to start out your journey with the American tech tree line, I would highly recommend going for something like the T110E4 or the T110E3. The reason for that is because these tanks are heavy, they got a lot of armor, they have big guns, they're tank destroyers, they're fairly easy to play, and they're quite forgiving in a lot of circumstances. So that would be my recommendation for those newer players who want to start out. Now, going to the German tech tree line. If you want to start out with your German tech tree line, I would recommend going for the E100 first, and then maybe the E50M after that, and maybe the Grill A15, but again, the Grill A15 is a little bit skill-based. I wouldn't recommend going the other lines, like the Jagdpanzer E100 is decent, but again, not the best. So E100, E50M, definitely 2 tanks that I would recommend going for if you're a newer player. For the German line. Soviets. IS-7, 100%. I would recommend this tank for all new players that want to play the game. The IS-7 line is easy to play, easy to master, very fun, and you'll enjoy it. Another one would be the IS-4. Again, quite an easy line. The KV-4 and the KV-3 are a little bit iffy, but if you've played the KV-1 and the KV-1S, you will know how to play the KV-3 and of course the KV-4. The ST-1 and the IS-4 are quite good tanks, so again, very noob friendly. And for a tank destroyer, this is the first one of the first tank destroyers I would recommend going for is, of course, this Object 268, which the line is so much fun to play and so easy. You literally just point your gun and you shoot and you just derp people to hell. So, yeah, for the Soviet line as a new player, I would recommend the IS-7, the IS-4, and, of course, the Object 268. Now going to the British line. For the Brits, I would probably recommend going for the FV215B1A3. And the reason for that is the line itself is pretty easy to play. They have very, very good guns. And I mean, this tank is literally point and shoot and do big alpha. You can't get any easier than that. But if I have to choose another tank, I'd probably go for the FV215B if you really want to play it. This tank, though, is a little bit skill-based. Like, you need to know how to play side scraping, going hold down. So I wouldn't recommend going for this tank. So literally the only tank I would probably recommend going for in the British line is just the FV215B, and that's it. I wouldn't recommend anything else. Then we go to the Japanese tech tree line, which I have none of the tanks for, but I would recommend for the Japanese tech tree, probably the Hori. Such an easy tank to play and such a good tank to play. I've played this tank elsewhere, not on my account, on a press account. Very fun. Very, very fun. So yeah, definitely. Moving on. The Chinese line. I would probably go for the WZ 113 GFT, just because the tech tree line is so easy to play. They're really fun tanks. They play very much like the 268 line. So this is probably the one tank that I would recommend getting, and maybe as well the WZ 121. I think this is a perfect starter medium tank as well, alongside the E50M. You've got a 122mm gun, so it's very, very nice. And it's easy to play as a medium tank. Now talking about the French tanks. I would probably go for the Foch 155. Again, very good armor. The whole tech tree line is pretty damn good. And of course, you come to the Foch 155, which is just a fantastic tank, and it really is a fun tank. It's a little bit more skill-based, but once you've sort of like understood how tank destroyers go, then you can probably go for this line. Like a lot of the French tanks, I wouldn't recommend getting them from the get-go. Get some of the German and the American and the Soviet tanks first before going for the French. But if you had to go for French, it'll be this one, the Foch 155. And now finally, we're going to the pièce de résistance, the European tech trees. I would recommend the 60 TP line for the Polish tanks, 100%. This is a great tank. I would recommend the Kranwagen line for the Swedish tanks, because this tank here, this tank line specifically, if you want to learn how to play auto reloaders and you want to learn how to play hold down, this tech tree line is fantastic. From the Emil 1, the Emil 2, and the Kranwagen, these three tanks really do hammer in how to play auto reloaders and how to play hold down using your gun depression and your turret armor to really help you. So I would recommend going for the Kranwagen. It's very forgiving in a lot of circumstances. Yes, it is quite skill-based in a lot of aspects, but just to understand the mechanics of going hold down in a good turret and tank at T10, as well as having an auto reloading function and how to learn it, this is one of the best tanks that you can use as a newer player. As for mediums, I would probably recommend the CS63. This for me is probably one of the better medium tanks in the European tech tree line, the Polish ones. I said Czechoslovakian, I was wrong, it's a Polish one, my bad. It's a Polish medium tank, so just ignore what I said originally. I would recommend going for this one. If you really want like a European medium, go for the CS63. It's basically like a Leopard 1, but slightly better. And would I pick anything else? That's it, I think. I think that's it. That would be it. I wouldn't recommend going the other ones, especially not the Progetto 65. The Progetto 65 is very much skill-based, so don't go for that line. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a bit different. It's something that a lot of players have been asking me. It's something that a lot of players need to understand in terms of tech trees. But nonetheless, I digress. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comments down below what you want to see next and how I can help you improve yourself in the game as much as I possibly can. So, guys, look after yourselves, look after your friends and family, peace in the Middle East, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.